I sprayed my wrist. I smelled my wrist. I sprayed perfume on my clothing. I sprayed it in my hair. I smelled the air around me. I would feel something alive. I would feel the sense of euphoria. I would do this hundreds of times, thousands of times, maybe tens of thousands of times. At that time, I owned about 350 bottles, and I can tell you every single fragrance in my collection. I can tell you every note. I can tell you who the perfumer was. I can tell you the story behind it. I can tell you what my favorite fragrances were, which ones to wear in this season, for this occasion, for this particular event. I had people asking me for advice all the time. I felt like I mattered in the fragrance world. And then I downsized from 350-ish to about 40 bottles. And then I bought back about 35 to 40 bottles. And every single time I bought back a fragrance, I hated myself. I was asking myself, why are you buying these bottles back? You just sold them. Why? You don't need them back. Why are you doing this? And I felt so much shame and guilt. And then I realized that this was never about the fragrance. It was never about collecting perfume. This goes so much deeper. But in order to understand that story, we have to go back 13 years ago to New York City. So you see, at that time, I was living in Hoboken and I was working off of Wall Street in New York City. I was a healthcare IT consultant and I was working at a really high stake job in New York City at a high stress, highly competitive position. And I was working full time, but I was really, really, really sick. And I could not figure out what was wrong with me. No doctor could. I went from doctor to doctor, either allopathic, holistic, homeopathic. I went to chiropractors to acupuncturists, you name it, I went there. Nobody had an answer for me. Nobody had a diagnosis. They all had different opinions, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, MS, it's in your head, your gut is messed up, you're just too stressed out, you need more sleep, change your diet, whatever. You name it, I probably got it. But no one had a definitive diagnosis. And the entire time I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker, but I was still working that full-time job because I had to sustain my living. And the whole time, I was commuting from the World Trade Center Mall to New York City. So from Hoboken, I would go from Hoboken to World Trade Center Mall to my office off of Wall Street. It was about a 10, 15-minute commute, but I was so sick, I was in so much physical, neurological, musculoskeletal pain that I could not actually make it to my office in one shot. I couldn't walk the 10 to 15 minutes. Most people, they had their headphones in, they would have their cup of coffee, they would just walk along. Even if they didn't want to be at work, they would just go about their day. I was in so much pain that I literally couldn't make that walk in one shot. And the World Trade Center Mall was still pretty new back then, so there weren't a whole lot of stores. There was a Starbucks that was packed, that had no seating. There was like a little grab and go place you can grab like sandwiches or breakfast that had no seating. And there was Sephora. And the Sephora at the time was up the escalators and then up back towards my office. And there was a little bench outside. And I would stop at the bench and I would just sit there and gain enough strength that I can just sit there and collect my thoughts and get enough energy to get up and go to my office. And I would just sit there and look at the floor, and I would be so full of anger and frustration and confusion and pain and wonder why this was happening to me and think to myself, this isn't fair. Why is this happening to me? This doesn't seem right. And you see, at the time, let me give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I was a high-level athlete my whole life. I played soccer for my entire life. I was a huge gym rat. I loved to weightlift. I had a lot of muscle. I was a really avid swimmer, so I swam competitively in high school, and I loved to swim. I loved to run. And my illness took all of that away. I could do none of that. I couldn't play any sports. I couldn't run. I couldn't lift weights. I could do none of the things that I love to do. And those things, athleticism and sports, was a major part of my identity. It shaped who I was growing up. It was my way of showing the world that I still mattered, that I had an identity. Because growing up, I didn't really feel enough. I never felt enough. And sports and athleticism and bodybuilding was my way of feeling enough. Like I had a mask on or armor on that made me feel like the world could see me the way that I wanted them to see me. And the illness stripped all that away. So I was sitting at Sephora every single day. Every single day I would commute from the World Trade Center Mall to my office. And every single day to and from my office, I would stop at that bench and I would just sit there and collect my strength to get up and go to wherever I needed to go. And then one day I just decided to walk in and I would go to the fragrance department in Sephora and I just picked up some bottles of fragrance and I would spray a blotter and I would smell it. And I would pick up another bottle and I would spray a blotter and I would smell it. And I did this every single day. And then something happened. I would spray a blotter of a fragrance and I would smell it and I would close my eyes and I would just breathe in the notes and I would think, is it citrusy? Is it woodsy? Is it oriental? Is it floral? Do I like it? Do I not like it? And in that time, everything else fell away. Everything else melted away. The world around me that I no longer recognized, the body that I thought betrayed me, that I felt alien to, just melted away. And I would only focus on the fragrance. And I did that every single day. And I felt a sense of calm and peace and presence. And like I still mattered. And fragrances became the replacement for my sports and my athleticism. It became the thing that I held on to as my constant in a world of chaos, both outside and inside of myself. And I did this every single day, and I started to know the sales associates, and they knew me by name, and they knew my story. And I would smell so many different fragrances, and I became familiar with different houses, different brands. I started buying a fragrance or two. My first fragrance was Ralph Lauren's Polo Red, and then I bought Victor and Rolf Spice Bomb, and then I bought Versace, then I bought Tom Ford, and then I just started buying one fragrance after another, and then one fragrance became two, and two became three, and three became more and more, and one drawer of fragrances became two drawers, and three drawers became four, and four drawers became my fragrance cabinet. And I started researching online. I started watching YouTube reviews. I started watching videos, and I started reading about fragrances on Fragrantica and all these different forums. And I started joining Facebook groups for fragrances and talking to people about fragrances all day long and sharing their stories with me, how they got into perfumery, how I got into perfumery. And I started to learn about this whole wide world of this whole thing that I didn't even know existed. I thought perfumery was just going into Macy's and being bombarded by sales associates. Or, I only owned two fragrances at the time before I even got into perfume. I owned Acqua di Gio and I owned Jean Paul Gaultier's Le Male back in high school. I only owned those two fragrances. So I was never really a huge collector of perfume. But I had this whole wide world that I didn't even know existed open up to me. And it became a passion of mine. I started learning about perfumery and perfumers and how perfume is made. And I started talking to people about the perfumery all day long. And it became an obsession. It became something that I could identify myself with. It became my identity. You see, my identity was sports and athleticism. And that was gone. So now perfumery became my identity. But it wasn't just perfumery. I used to live in Hoboken, like I said, and I would walk by this one clothing store every single week. I would walk by like once or twice a week. And I would walk by and think nothing of it. And then one day I just decided to walk in. And I walked in, I tried on a few different button-down shirts and a couple pairs of jeans, and everything in that store fit me like a glove, like a bespoke suit. Everything fit me so perfectly well. And it was high quality material, and it was made in Italy or made in Spain, and it just felt so good. And I started buying more clothing, and I bought more shoes. And my outfits and my fragrances, that became my armor. That became my mask to the outside world that made me feel like I was enough, like I still mattered, like I was still Dave, like I still had part of me that was identifiable, and I was still somebody, and I was still somebody in this world. And I started buying more and more perfumery and more clothing and more outfits because I felt like that was my way of feeling enough. And the thing is, I was trying to buy back my identity. I was trying to buy back a piece of me that I lost, that I was grieving deeply, which is a sacred process. But I was grieving it, and I was buying back something that I couldn't identify with. I thought I was buying clothing, and I thought I was buying shoes or fragrances because it made me feel good. What I was really doing was buying back a piece of me that I thought I lost. Here's the thing though. You're never lost. I was never lost. I was in deep suffering, in deep grief, and in deep pain. But I was still perfect the way I was. I was still whole. I was still enough. No amount of clothing, no amount of shoes, no amount of fragrances, no amount of anything external to you could ever fill a gap. I want you to know that if you're watching this, if any part of this resonates with you, if you've built a collection of fragrances or clothing or anything else to make you feel like you're enough, I want you to know that I hear you and I see you, and that you've always been perfect the way you are. You've always been enough. You've always mattered. You were never gone. You were never lost. You just have to find your way back home. And I want you to know that if you're watching this, I see you and I hear you, and you do matter. And together, we're going to keep moving home. So come with me and keep moving home.